The Palace of Versailles in the 17th century was home to a continental superpower, a fashion hub for the eyes of the world, a bastion for the arts and sciences, and an absolute stinking hot mess. Though no doubt the world's leading power at the time, the hygiene and cleanliness of the famed royal palaces was infamously terrible. Hair crawling with lice, check. Sewage in the kitchen, check. 6-inch tapeworms, check. Guys peeing off balconies, check. People squatting down in the middle of a corridor to drop a massive, yeah, that too, check. Without a doubt, women of the royal court faced the worst of it all. A raucous crowd in the room where you're going to give birth, check. Welcome to History on Fleek. Today we examine the worst of hygiene of royal women in 17th century France. As a woman in medieval Europe, tending to one's bathing, cleanliness, and overall hygiene was nothing short of a nightmare. Belief systems of the time had placed hot water as something to be avoided. Unfortunately, the medicine of medieval Europe was a little behind. Though it recognized that hot water could relax and open pores, it had taken on a fear that doing so would instantly leave one susceptible to disease. To pile on this aqua prejudice, the church maintained that available bathhouses were only luxury environments. The church said no, the science of the time said no, so people didn't wash so much. So entrenched was the attitude against bathing, it was rumored King Louis XIV would only bathe on doctor's orders.
You filthy animal.
Rumor has it, the king was more likely to wash with a cloth aided by saliva or alcohol. As for the rest of the population, commonly people would avoid full-body baths, usually only washing their hands and face. Perhaps most troubling for women was the practice of bathing as an entire family. Yes, entire families would bathe one at a time in the same water. The order was males first, so women were inevitably bathing in a likely tepid pool of water men had already washed in. Charming. As you may be able to imagine, or may have even heard, the smell around the royal palace was somewhat potent. Pungent. Evidently, no one had the wherewithal to connect the stench to people's abandonment of washing. Though some would fight the rising tide of odor, many chose to wash with clothes doused in perfume. The result, according to some, was a pervading aroma throughout the royal palace, somewhat sweet and somewhat sickly. Among the factors contributing to people's ill hygiene and the general stench of the Palace of Versailles were the toilets, or should I say lack thereof. Yeah, along with a total abandonment of bathing in the 17th century, they did not have toilets. It wouldn't be until the 19th century that drainage systems, cesspools, and toilets were part of the everyday. This left the women and men of the 17th century having the undignified task of using chamber pots. One would relieve themselves into their pot and then, frankly, they'd usually just throw it out of the nearest window. It's been reported some men would urinate off the nearest balconies available. As for the royal palace at Versailles, it was regarded as one of the most disgusting hygiene sites you could possibly encounter. People just did their business in the corridors. No, people weren't that happy to see each other, they were just gross. Evidently, enough complaints from visitors were noted, and in 1715, a decree was passed to clean the palace corridors once a week. As for how people cleaned or wiped during such a low-tech toilet era, they used corncob leaves or their hands. Yeah, let's just move on from the toilets back then. My stomach's turning. Fashion was of utmost import to the courtiers at the Palace of Versailles. However, that's not to say it was all that practical or hygienic. Paris, France in the 17th century was the fashion trendsetter for the Western world, so half the purpose of the royal court was to indulge in ever-escalating fashion. Notably, ginormous wigs became wildly popular. Human hair, goat's hair, horse hair, it was all the same to the nobles of Versailles. Women of the court truly took the reins when it came to fashion. Hair for women of the royal court was more like a medieval attempt to construct a billboard atop one's head. Placing either a wire frame or a cushion of horsehair on their heads, noble women of the day would wrap and pile hair till it would tower above head height. These multi-story hair complexes would be so celebrated that they would be named and given ornaments to finish them off. Ships, windmills, a pleasant rose garden. These were all trendy finishes to a well-made 4-foot follicle fortress. Apparently this was all kept in place with beef fat pomade. So that's even more smell then. Oh, God. Unfortunately for the French fashionistas, the lack of washing generally kinda caught up with them. With the fall and spring typically being when one would brave the danger of washing with hot water, hair was a pretty grimy business. Between a gallon of beef pomade and leaving it unwashed, lice was in just about any and every head, be they rich or poor, wig or scalp. Women of the nobility would likely be seen using silver claws with lengthy handles to scratch ever-bitten scalps. The plight of living months at a time with a stack of lice-ridden hair was socially understood. Banquets and the like would have these silver claws at the table for ever-itching women of high society to use. Maybe a point to consider, while this lice-ridden state is nothing to desire, most poor women would be forced to cut all theirs off. Food safety and hygiene are something of non-negotiable importance to the modern person. As for the royal court of Versailles, they had a different approach. In a setting where masses of feces could be found on the floor, and most people prefer a cloth and herbal paste to wash with, the hygiene of food was understandably impacted. The plumbing at the palace was lacking and prone to adding to the disgusting buildup of stench. On a less humorous note, the plumbing issues could make food preparation more hazardous. It has been written that in one instance, sewage reached the private kitchens of Marie Antoinette, and the last queen of France presumably skipped lunch that day. The results of this hygiene deficit in totality were a lot of intestinal problems. Most prominently, worms. It's understood the lack of proper food handling left many of Versailles' courtiers riddled with intestinal parasites. Nobility could not be saved from the consequences of not cleaning up after themselves. Among many ongoing health problems, Louis XIV was struck with many instances of tapeworm, including one occasion where he passed a 6-inch tapeworm. Alas, Harold the Sun King, the biggest palace, the biggest army, the biggest art collection, and the biggest tapeworm. Without a doubt, the biggest hygiene indignities suffered at the time belonged to royal women. That's not to say they were responsible for the indignity. Far from it, they didn't have a choice. The custom of the time was that a royal birth should be witnessed by as many people as possible. Reportedly, when Queen Therese went into labor, she soon found herself provided a live studio audience, if you will. Yes, for the totality of an agonizing, frightening labor of 12 hours, the queen, like any royal of the time, was surrounded by watching courtiers. So why this abundant, intrusive lack of dignity? So desired and vital were royal babies, the birth required people to witness the event for 2 important factors. One, that the declared sex of the baby was correctly reported. Secondly, and more interestingly, to see if the baby was alive and well and not otherwise. Or for that matter, reported to be otherwise when brought healthily into the world. Yep, 17th century French nobility had an eye out for any hoax babies. Baby truthers, if you will. The discomfort and trauma of this are close to unimaginable. It's been said Marie Antoinette had such a stuffy packed room during her labor, she passed out shortly after childbirth. However, while thanking the heavens we've moved into more enlightened times, the emotional urgency of the event was not misplaced. During the 17th century, childbirth would commonly lead to death in an age of crude medicine. Be it the mother from the ordeal or the infant, death was abound. 1 in 3 babies born in 17th century France would not see the age of 3. So, maybe now you get the somewhat ecstatic, widespread joy surrounding royal births of the time. This being said, a lot of people could have kept their joy to themselves a bit more. Maybe not so much in the delivery room. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.